Hi everyone, good morning. Today we are going to present about the germline genome editing for preventing HIV. Let's get started with the introduction to the germline genome editing. Let's start with the genome editing. Genome editing is a set of techniques that give researchers the ability to modify the DNA of an organism. It includes the insertion, elimination, or modification of genetic materials at specific locations in the genome. And this modification of DNA of the species includes the plants, bacteria, and animals. It allows the improvements in physical features such as the probability of inherited diseases and eye colors. Let me relate my case study with the human immunodeficiency virus HIV. HIV is the causative agent for the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. And here are some data about the HIV. Even though with the advancement of medical technology nowadays, the AIDS is no longer a lethal disease. However, no one wishes to live with HIV and allow their offspring experience the same things. Therefore, some of the people start searching for cure by using the genome editing methods. The latest genome editing technology is called CRISPR-Cas9. It is short form for cluster regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats and CRISPR associated protein 9. This technology is quicker, easier, more precise and effective than other current methods. It allows the alterations of offspring's genome to prevent the invasion of HIV. This technology can use to disable the functions of CCR5 gene. The CCR5 gene acts as a receptor for HIV to bind with and enter the target cell. The disable of functions of CCR5 gene makes the HIV unable to invade human cells by using these methods, which means the human found the prevention methods for the invasion of HIV. In our case study, Mr. David is the AIDS patient. He contracted HIV few years ago and now he and his wife just get married and they wish for a child. And they decided to genetically modify the embryos by using the CRISPR methods to prevent their child from being infected with HIV. They thought this can keep their child away from the negative feelings as an AIDS patient. However, the germline modification technique is still premature and not allowed in this world. The consequence on their offspring is also very risky, like they were exposed to uncertain gene mutation and higher risk to influenza. And this decision undoubtedly have serious impact on their child and future generations. Our questions are, should David and his wife modify their child's genome to prevent HIV? And is it ethical to control their child's gene with good faith? From our opinions, we think that it is unethical because the germline genome editing is violated the human dignity and rights. Let's move on to the ethical issues. The first ethical issue is about the safety of the embryos and their future generations. We are lacking of convincing medical methods to validate the use of CRISPR technology in embryos for the moment. The potential effects of this technology on the embryos are unidentifiable. A long observation and continuous safety monitoring are required along their growth to obtain a safe conclusion that it can be used. The infants are insecure in terms with lower resistance towards the influenza and virus, and they might also expose to unidentified genetic mutation. Hence, this will lead to the safety issues of the future generations and the embryos themselves. The second ethical issue is about the human dignity and rights of the embryos and their future generations. It related to the violations of the principle of medical ethics. A physician shall be dedicated to provide competent medical care with compassion and respect for human dignity and rights. According to Article 24 UNESCO Declaration, germ cell intervention could be regarded contrary to human dignity. US government is not going to provide any public fundings in germline gene modification. This is because it could have an unexpected impact on the growth of child and have long-term side effects that are not yet identified. And the embryos and the future generations themselves don't have the right to make any choices whether they should take the medication because they are not yet born to this world. So this leads to the issues of human dignity and rights. The third issue is about the informed concerns of the embryos and parents. In AMA Code of Medic Ethics, the informed consent is quite important as it's stated. However, it is difficult to gain informed consent from the embryos and the future generations because they are the patient themselves and they are not yet born to this world. While another sector of informed consent is from parents, they might also unclear about the consequence of these genetic modifications to their child. For example, the CRISPR experiment conducted by He Jiankui, he told the parents about that his research team was conducting an AIDS vaccine development project but not a genetic modification project on CCR5, which means he provided the wrong information. And the prospective parents did not understand about the technical terms like CCR5 gene, and there were no further explanation provided for them to clarify it. So this leads to issues of informed consent. Let's consider this case from the utilitarian perspective. Utilitarianism is subject to theory that an act that is done contributes to effects on which ethical decisions are measured. And in short, it claims that the positive results should be greater than the negative outcomes, such as happiness should be greater than the misery for all affected stakeholders. It aims at the advantages that can outweigh the damage during the decision making. Utilitarianism is an instrument that can enable one to determine the right step to take after assessing the advantages and losses that were imposed to the participating stakeholders. This is the benefits to harms ratio table. The first stakeholder is the parents. They can give birth of child with immunity to HIV and reduce the possible negative prejudice of public on the child. However, they might also receive emotional implication due to societal pressure on the ethics and financial implication as genome editing on embryo are incredibly expensive. Potential offsprings can born with natural immunity to HIV. However, they might also expose to higher risks of uncertain genetic mutation and more susceptible to effects of the influenza. For physicians, they can help to reduce the burden of AIDS patients and improve medical procedure in curing them. However, they may also receive penalty and criticism from society because genetic modification of human embryo is still restricted. For society, they might face less threats from infection of HIV and lessen prejudice to AIDS patients. However, this might lead to conditions of injustice in distribution and discrimination because the expensive technology might only available to wealthy people. According to principle of utility, it seems ethical as this decision can prevent their child from suffering AIDS. However, we should consider also the rule utilitarianism. It states that following the rules at the same time, making a good decision that leads to good consequence. Therefore, the decision is not ethical. Because the genome editing methods on embryo is restricted in many countries and is not supported by any ethics organization. This will expose their child to many other risks such as uncertain gene mutation and higher risks to influenza.
Okay, now we look at the case study based on Deontology perspective, and we can say that when considering medical ethics in terms of embryo genetic modification, many of the theories and principles in Deontology may be violated. So one of the best known theory in Deontology is Kantian ethics. Do germline genome editing obey Kantian ethics? The answer is no, and it is unethical. This is due to the ethical decision made by Kantian ethics need to consider the nature of the act itself but not the consequences, and also based on the case study, Kant will not interest in its benefits such as preventing David's child and his future generation from contracting HIV or to make them live a normal life without discrimination and interference. Instead, Kant does not think that this benefit make genetic modification morally justified, as the good consequences are come from bad actions. Okay, now we look at the categorical imperative. Based on the first categorical imperative, we can know that if the act in a way that cannot be permitted and universalized to everyone, this action is unethical and absolutely prohibited. And in this case study, the technology is still premature and not allowed in the world. So David and his wife's decision to genetically modify their embryo is violating Kant ethics, and it is also related to ethical principle of justice, because genetically modification of embryo may also lead to discrimination, because not all people can receive and afford to this technology. And also based on second categorical imperative, we can know that in this case study, the genetic modification have not matured yet with many unknown risks and consequences, so the action taken by physicians will be using someone else in order to reach their own goals, which is to doing research and experiments. So it against the second categorical imperative, which stated that we should treat the person as an end and never simply as a mean. So it does treat humanity as a mean in the sense that parents and the physicians decide to their own personal goals when embryo cannot give consent at the time they will be inedited. And this also related to three ethical principles. The first is respect to autonomy, because it is impossible to obtain informed consent from embryo and the future generation when they are going to editing their genome. And also it related to the ethical principle of non-maleficent and the beneficent, because there are many unknown risks of this technology, including mosaicism, off-target effect, on-target undesirable change, genome mutation, and more vulnerable to influenza, and also shorten the life of the child. If you ask is it legal, we can say that human genome editing is largely banned by guidelines, laws, and regulation in most of the countries, even in the countries permissive to human embryonic stem cell research, and regulatory approaches are varied by country. There is a broad agreement among the scientific community and the public that germline genome editing is a red line that should not be crossed due to the concern in safety, social, and ethical issue. However, there is no international treaties of general application that can directly regulate the human genome editing or the possibilities of its modification. However, the discussion on methods of genetic editing of embryo and germ cell shows the competition between two legal protected rights, which are the right to undertake therapy such as enabling the birth of a healthy child and the right to protect the biodiversity of future generations. Now we will discuss the case study based on religious perspective. The first religion we will look at is Islam. The guiding principle for Muslims is that all life is created by and belongs to Allah, and Allah controls when we born and when we die. So there are two perspectives which are support and against for the germline genome editing. So for those who support the germline genome editing, they think that the embryo does not have a soul until later in pregnancy may support the genetic modification of embryo at early stage of their development to ensure that they do not suffer in the future is a sign of truly following Islam. But for who against the germline genome editing, they consider the unknown risk of germline modification to be too great, and they will consider their role in prevent harm for future generation. And some maybe also consider that genetic makeup is one of the Allah plans, and germline genome editing will against the Allah plants. Okay, so the second religion is Buddhism. The core of Buddhist ethics is compassion, which is the concept of karuna. It involves the beneficent, non-maleficent, and also other forms of altruism. So Buddhism sees the genetic modification technologies as an important ways to relieve human suffering and promote human well-being. From this perspective, the Buddhism is support the germline genome editing, but for the perspective of against germline genome editing, they think that if the germline therapy was negatively affect the future generation, then they will consider this to be violence against these people. And also some Buddhists may feel that the diseases or illness are a form of dukkha and maybe the just result from former bad action they have performed. So instead of curing this disease, they should focus on achieve the enlightenment in Buddha. The next religion we are going to discuss is Hinduism. So there are three key principles for many Hindus are those ahimsa, which is non-violence, daya, compassion, and dharma, duty. So some Hindus may support the genetic modification with the reasons really relieving suffering is an act of daya, which is compassion, and is a Hindu dharma, which is duty to cure the sick. And the law of karma also stated that all of the action will have consequences, and if we're trying to cure the diseases and relieve from suffering, it will lead to a positive consequences. But if we ignore those who suffer from disease, it's likely to have negative consequences. And for those who against the germline genome editing, they think that it will be violence and seems to go against the principle of ahimsa. If germline genome editing was to negatively affect the future generation, and Ayurveda also focus upon the balance and the connection between mind, body, and spirit. So these procedures may solve the genetic problem, but it is not those factors that will also contribute to ill of the health. Well, from a Christianity perspective, Christians believe that God creates all life and that human life is sacred to God. And human beings are the steward of the God creation, and the key principle of Christian is sanctity of life. For those who support the germline genome editing, they give the reason that scientists will be acting as stewards if they could develop a treatment to ensure the future generation do not suffer from genetic condition and diseases. And also many Protestants believe that embryos that are younger than 14 days old do not have full human status. But for those who against the germline genome editing, they give the reason that the unknown risk of germline editing to be too great, and in their role of stewards, they need to prevent harm from for future generation. And some Christians also concerned that this expensive type of treatment will only be available to wealthy people, and so it will go against Christian teaching on justice. Okay, in conclusion, our opinion on this case study about a couple's intention to genetically modify an embryo with good fare to prevent their child from contracting HIV is not ethical, and David and his wife should not modify their child's genome. And our final decision is same with our preliminary decision, and we give three reasons to support our decision, which are a utilitarian perspective. Uh, we think that this action is not maximizing the well-being and minimizing the suffering, as there are too many unknown risks and consequences, and at the current status of genome editing, it still could not provide greatest benefit for greatest number of people. So from a Deontology perspective, we think that this technology against Kantian ethics, ethical principles, and also regulations in most of the countries. And also from religious perspective, we think that Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity tend to against the germline genome editing, even they are focused on relieving people from suffering, because germline genome editing poses too many unknown risks and consequences to future generation. Lastly, we will provide some recommendation and precaution to this germline genome editing technology. So we think that Malaysia related parties should have further discussion on this issue to reach a common agreement, and there is a need of regulatory norms to avoid misuse and abuse of germline editing technology. And also the related parties such as universities should do more research on this technology to have better understanding and can discover new knowledge. And also government of different countries should contract and develop more effective and binding mechanism to constrain the use of genome editing technology, and also more specific guidelines and preventive measures should be formulated, and a collaborative network should be strengthened. This is our references, and thank you.